Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome yet to another video. Today we're going to talk about how to build your credit profile step by step. There's a whole lot of stuff that we got to cover, so I want you to stick around until the very end to get the most benefit. This one's going to be a slightly lengthy video because I don't want to miss any specific details that are pertinent to building and establishing your personal credit. And obviously I want you to get the best value from this. So the first thing we could probably do is, before we start building our credit, I want you guys to understand that prior to building it, to get the best value possible and to get the maximum results and optimal value, is to ensure that your credit reports are somewhat cleaned up. And I say somewhat is because sometimes what happens is you might have some personal identifiers, and we talked about that quite a bit, that are still remaining in your credit profile, and they're yet to be taken care of, or they're not gone yet. So for that reason, I think that it's kind of okay that it's not done yet, because that you can take your time with and you can adjust those things. But outside of that, I hope that all the negative items are pretty much off your credit reports, and you're essentially just waiting out to fill for the next step of things that you need to do, which is the elevation of the next few steps, and hopefully follow that roadmap. So the first thing I'm going to ask you guys to do is, if you have to look at your existing creditors, I think we can start with that. We're going to start also with the second point is going to be our non-essential primaries. I'm going to actually put a list here so you guys can see it. So the first step, again, existing creditors. Second, non-essential primary trade lines. 3, if you want to add authorized users with some friends and associates or relatives, that's a strategy you can work with. And then from that on, we can start building up what we need to do. So those are some of the essential things that we're going to talk about, right? And then the final, and I guess the final point we're going to do is we're going to discuss as a bonus some of the alternative ways to enhance your credit profile the optimal way in a very short period of time. And when I say short period of time, I don't mean overnight. I'm talking about at least 3 to 6 months. And some of the transactional requirements for using your personal credit. So with that said, I think that we're going to start with the first step, which is your existing creditors. The reason why this is so important, and a lot of people mess up on this, is because they don't necessarily prioritize the relationships that they already have. The reason why, it's because they never saw that creditor as a tool or leveraging situation as a way to go ahead and advance and stack up on that relationship. So the one trick I'd like you guys to observe is, if you have had, let's say, 24-month payment grid, and you don't see any specific type of mistakes in that payment grid, and you see that you've been performing pretty good, the recommendation there is use that to your advantage, and ask the creditor to go ahead and see if they can give you a promotional bump. And this promotional bump is so important because that's just their confidence in you to say that this customer has been with us for a long time, and this is the opportunity for us to optimize, to give them as much as we possibly can within a short period of time. Typically, you want to have a relationship that has at least 12 months season. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people try to get credit bumps after 6 months. And albeit you can actually qualify for that depending on how aggressively you use that card, which is the other tactic that we can talk about. Typically within the first 12 months is an ideal scenario where you can actually go ahead and request credit bumps, to start with. So that's the first step, right? So when you look at your creditors, the way that you communicate with them is going to be a very essential part of getting those credit bumps, right? You have to communicate with them and ask them and speak to them about the fact that you look forward to utilizing some of the benefits within that credit card, whether it be cashback, rewards, air miles, travel, leisure expenditures you get some bonus points on that as well. So there are systems that you can look at and verify the information and the credentials of that credit card, and look at the benefits that you can use and leverage. And use that as a scale of a conversation. Use that as the hook to your conversation. And when you're having a detailed conversation with the representative on the other side looking at your credit profile, I highly recommend that you initiate a conversation where, during that conversation, you're having a process here to explain to them that the reason why you want to do it based on the merits of the account rather than a hard pull on your credit is because you're trying to preserve the credit, because you want to get into some sort of real estate investing or something. So this is one of the most important things that you have to mention, and full transparency really helps you get across to the other person on the other side while having that discussion about some of the benefits of that card that will eventually give you some idea of the typical type of bumps that you can get. And assuming that you actually don't get that bump, and for some reason the offer is knocked down and you're basically not being extended credit, the next best thing to do is basically ask the representative on the other side when the ideal time would be to get that strategic bump, when the ideal time would be that we can reconsider looking at my account to see if there's anything available. And typically what happens is they'll give you some sort of timeline. Usually they tell you try another 60 days, or try another 90 days, which is a 3-month period. And during those instances, what would happen is there would be a tendency where they can actually say, yeah, probably I'm gonna try back in 90 days, right? So that's my recommendation. Start with your existing creditors. That's a very critical and pivotal point to building your credit, because unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize the benefits that you already have with your existing creditors, the benefits of really working with what the tools and resources you have in your disposal. So that's the first point, obviously. The second point is the non-essential primaries, as we discussed. And these are some of the points that I think a lot of people miss by a long shot, and they overdo it, and they go to apply for all these type of primaries that are, yeah, for sure in your name. Obviously, they're not seasoned, but they're in your name. And, you're trying to obviously build your credit with it. If you've done the tools of trying to work with your existing creditors, and you get some strategic bumps with them, and even though, for example, I'll give you an example of this one. Even though you might have to do a hard pull and your credit is somewhat decent and you get approved during that hard pull and you get a double limit. So instead, let's assume you started with 2,000 and now you get a 4,000. The context is much better than what you're going to get brand new primary. And the reason I say that is because there's history there. There's obviously history. There's a reputation that's already established. There's growth, which is the FICO 10T will pick up on that trend from an existing creditor, demonstrated growth. The potential of doing a lot more with that creditor down the road. So even though they have to do a hard pull, it's not a bad thing. So it is times, at times you might have to do that, and it is something that you have to be open to the idea of. But let's assume that you don't necessarily have strong relationships because you have to just clean up your credit and you got to start from scratch. Then these non-essential primaries are going to help you. Just to give you a list, My Jewelers Club, Hutton Chase, New Coast Direct, Self.Inc., Care Credit. Those are just some of the elements to start with. And I would start with that. And build up those relationships strategically bit by bit until the point where you actually build up a pretty sufficient amount to continue and scale to a point where you can actually leverage that as a tool to continue on and applying with some major institutions that, they would say, well, yeah, this person would qualify. Keep in mind, though, when you're getting non-essential primaries, you're going to have to let it season. When I say seasoning, I mean let the payment history be catched with the performance of your financial performance, and give it at least a good 90 to 120 days, or perhaps even 6 months before a reasonable payment history is kind of logged with those creditors, these non-essential primaries. And the reason I say that is because that demonstrates the payment history recorded on time in a very confident manner. And the reason I say that is because payment history is definitely 35% of your score. And you have all the more chances to improve that if you maintain a seasoned balance of positive payment history. So that's the second thing that I believe you want to do as soon as you complete step one, which is work with your existing creditors. The third step, and this step is basically an optional step, albeit I think a lot of people will have the option to exercise this step, is communicate with some of the people, friends and family, associates, even some parents, some people, to see whether you can actually leverage their personal credit. Just tell them that, look, I want to add myself to your credit accounts. I'm not necessarily asking you to give me your credit cards. You can actually take that card and keep it. But the benefit here is that I actually get the history that you have, and it goes onto my credit, and it helps me tremendously. That's a conversation you want to have with some of the friends, close associates, family even, or parents, to see if you can qualify, even a relative for that matter, to work with them to add yourself to those accounts. The more the merrier, because it gives a huge leverage. And it's still a very good opportunity and way to go ahead and take that benefit of their history and the long standing of good credit that they have, hopefully. You don't want to take an AU that doesn't necessarily have a stable credit history, because that's going to basically harm you than do you good, right? So that's the third point that I want to emphasize on. Now we're going to move on to some of the strategic ways to build your credit. Now, we talked about, non-essential primaries, but think about doing secured transactions. Work with credit unions, community banks. I've seen some videos say that if you want to work with those guys because they're local and they'll know you by name. End result is that really doesn't matter. Knowing you by name or not, okay, that's okay. But at the end of the day, it's how much you're worth to them, right? What kind of leverage can you create given those circumstances? What kind of situations can you put yourself in to maximize the opportunity of the relationship you have with that creditor, regardless of tier 1 or tier 2 institution? The goal is demonstrates financial confidence in them, right? Show them that you're able to borrow, you have leveraged credit properly, that you have a way of building credit, your relationships are being stacked, your credit scores are kept up to date, and at a high point. And that's what really determines how strong your relationship is going to be. It's not necessarily by what name they call you or what kind of coffee you drink, albeit that's a good way of building a rapport, which is a critical component in business development, but not necessarily with establishing personal credit. But my recommendation for credit unions and community banks is because the leverage that you can get with them and the generous amount of credits that are being extended within those local communities is far greater than the tier one institutions who are playing at a conservative mode, because they have a lot more requirements than the traditional community credit unions and the local banks. In addition to that, the major financial institutions have investment resources and a plethora of tools and risk mitigation solutions to prevent extending or overextending credit to identify risk, right? So with that said, I think that's one of the tools that you can leverage. And look at the community credit unions that you feel would benefit you for multi-tier products. Don't just look at it for credit card perspective or loans, but multi-tier products can be lines of credit, home mortgages, car financing if you're looking for a brand new car. This is why personal finance and understanding your current situation and accountability is such a critical point, because we're all into this game of understanding how to fix our credit so hard that we forget some of the essential tools that are needed for us to understand our personal finance. By deep diving into personal finance, you can also establish credit that benefits you in financial ways rather than just looking at it to leverage your personal credit. So financial personal assessment is a very critical part in reference to which creditors you're going to apply for in the future, albeit if you don't have solid credit at the beginning, obviously you have to follow the steps that I just described, because you're going to have to skip on step 1 because you don't have established credit. But without that, you have to follow step 2, step 3, and step 4, which is build local community credit union relationships. That's a critical part as well. And then the fifth and final bonus point, and I think this one's very important, is look at the amount of deposits that you're making with institutions. And, if you're keeping heavy amounts of deposit, and when I say heavy, it's like a good percentage of your pay towards, that institution. You have a specific savings account, leverage that savings to turn it into a secure option. Some institutions actually like to offer you credit, sometimes at 105 to 120% of the savings that you have. You have to explore those options. I'm not necessarily going to list them out here. You'd have to do some research. I'm going to put a link that you guys can look up. A couple, actually. One of them is Doctor of Credit. They're pretty good. I signed up for their newsletter. If you guys want to do that as well, it's free. I'm not plugged by them, or I'm not being paid by them. I'm just giving you guys a resource that you can use to understand them a little bit better on your side. But look at them and look at the resources and tools that they offer. In addition to that, study some of the ways that you can actually go ahead and communicate with some of the banks to leverage the savings that you have to convert that into some sort of credit, albeit it could be a hybrid product, right? Where 50% of your credit is based on, or the 100% of your credit is based on 50% of the savings, and vice versa. So once you've actually seasoned your secured credit with those creditors, you've been leveraging and using it and exercising those credit muscles with those secured credit cards, a conversation down the road is where you can actually go back to them and explain to them that this is the time to convert it into unsecured and let go of those savings. And then basically that relationship will start brand new. But at the same time, given your history, there's confidence that you've instilled in them to even offer you that type of extension in the first place, right? So those are some of the ways that I think that you can start building your credit, right? So just to recap one more time, first, work with your existing creditors, because that's the first point you need to look at, especially when it comes to payment history and getting line increases based on the merits of your payment history. Number 2, the non-essential primary trade lines, add them so that you can leverage that as well, so that you can start seasoning those accounts for at least 3 to 6 months, so that you can establish payment history, which is the greatest part of your credit score. Third, look to establish relationships with some of the community credit unions, or actually that's the fourth point. The third is add some authorized users. If you have relationships with individuals, family, friends, relatives, parents who have decent credit, and they can add you to their credit profile, and you can explain to them the merits of that, especially if they have good credit. Fourth is learn to establish your relationships with these community credit unions and local banks, because they will give you the best type of leverage you can possibly imagine. And we'll finish off our conversation by saying, look, work with secured accounts. Turn your savings into some credit leverage account and use that and season that payment history for at least 6 months, and then go on to unsecured thereafter, because that is going to be one of the best tools that you can leverage when it comes to doing this properly. Okay, so that's my 2 cents for you guys when it comes to starting to build credit from scratch. What are some of the things that you need to do, especially if you have already existing one, so that you're not necessarily starting from scratch, but that is one tool that you can use. But if you don't have that, then points 2 to 5 will definitely help you guys out. And keep in mind, when you're establishing credit, you have to have some sort of financial responsibility towards those accounts, meaning that you need to have some sort of idea of how much you're going to spend And this is why personal finance and accountability is so critical. But with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to smash that like button if you did. Don't forget to share this video with those who are looking to build their personal credit. Don't forget to subscribe and turn the notifications on to all, so every time videos like these pop up, you will be the first to know. And with that said, this is definitely your guide and mentor. I'll definitely catch you guys on the next one. Bye for now.